The white cane struck the bottom step and Clara Avery stopped. She tilted her head the way she always did when listening for the direction of sound, and the singing from inside the church told her she was late. Not by much. The second hymn had only just begun. She could hear the congregation finding the higher notes of the verse, voices climbing together the way they did every Sunday morning in Redfield, Wyoming territory in the spring of 1879. She lifted her skirt with one hand and felt for the railing with the other. 3 steps. She had counted them every week for 15 years, first with Samuel beside her and now alone. 11 months alone. She found the top step, crossed the small porch, and pushed the door open with her shoulder because both hands were occupied. The cane tapped twice on the threshold and then found the center aisle. The singing did not stop, but it thinned. She could feel the attention shift the way a blind person feels weather change. A pressure. A turning. She moved forward, her left hand brushing the edge of the back pew, and began to lower herself onto the bench. A hand closed around her elbow. Not gently. "You cannot sit here, Clara. This pew is spoken for." The voice belonged to Dorothea Pruitt. Clara recognized the perfume, something sharp and floral that Dorothea had worn since her husband became the largest landowner in the valley. Clara straightened. "I have sat in this pew for 15 years, Dorothea." Dorothea did not release her arm. That was when Samuel was alive. Things are different now. A second hand found the small of her back. It pressed. Not hard enough to leave a mark, but hard enough to move a woman who could not see where she was being moved to. Clara stumbled forward and then sideways, and the cane caught on something, a boot or a bag, and she went down on one knee in the center aisle. No one reached for her. The hymn stuttered and then resumed, louder now, as if volume could cover what had just happened. Clara found her cane and pushed herself upright. Her knee burned where it had struck the wood. She stood in the aisle for a long moment, her face still, her breathing even, and then she turned and walked back toward the door. The tapping of the cane was the only sound beneath the singing. She did not cry. She had learned years ago that tears were something other people could see and use against you, and she had stopped offering them. Outside, the spring air was cold on her face. She found the railing and began the 3 steps down. Her knee ached with each one. She reached the bottom and turned left toward the road home, and that was when she heard the boots, heavy boots, expensive ones, crossing the porch behind her. A man cleared his throat the way men do when they are unsure whether to speak. "Ma'am." Clara stopped, but did not turn. "Ma'am, I saw what happened in there. I would be honored to walk you home if you would allow it." The voice was deep and unhurried. She did not recognize it, which meant the man was not from Redfield. She had cataloged every voice in this town across 15 years of darkness. "I do not need an escort." "No, ma'am. I expect you do not. But the road is washed out near the creek crossing, and there is a trench about 40 paces past the feed store that was not there last week." She considered this. A new trench meant a new obstacle, and new obstacles were the only real danger for a blind woman who had memorized every rut and stone in her daily path. "You are not from here." "No, ma'am. I arrived yesterday." "My name is Josiah Cade." She heard him step down beside her. He did not take her arm. He simply walked at her pace, matching the rhythm of her cane, and when she neared the trench he said only the word "left," and she adjusted without breaking stride. They walked the full mile in near silence. When they reached the cabin, he stopped at the gate. "Your fence needs mending on the south side. The post nearest the well has gone soft. I know, I can feel it lean when I hang the wash. I could fix it tomorrow if you would not mind." She turned toward his voice. Her face was calm, but something moved behind it, a wariness that had nothing to do with sight. Why would you do that? Because a fence should stand straight, and because nobody in that church deserved to call themselves Christian this morning. He said nothing else. She heard him tip his hat, though she could not see it, and then his boots moved back toward the road. Clara went inside and sat in the chair by the stove. She did not light a fire. She sat with her hands folded in her lap and listened to the house settle around her, the creak of the walls Samuel had raised, the tick of the clock she could not read, and she thought about the fact that a stranger had noticed what her neighbors had chosen to ignore. The next morning, Josiah Cade arrived at 7. Clara heard him before he knocked, the sound of a wagon and a horse, and then the particular thud of lumber being unloaded. She opened the door. I brought posts and some planking for the step. Your second step has a crack that will split by summer. She folded her arms. I did not ask for lumber. No, ma'am. But the step does not care whether you asked. It will break just the same. She almost smiled. She could feel the edges of it pulling at her mouth, and she pressed her lips together to stop it. She had not smiled in 11 months. He worked through the morning. She listened from the porch, following the sounds of his labor. The rhythm of a man who knew what he was doing. The hammer fell clean and even. The saw cut straight. She could tell from the sound of it. There was no wasted motion, no cursing, no pausing to figure out the next move. He had built things before. At noon she brought him water and 2 slices of bread with cold beef. He sat on the new step and ate. She sat in the doorway above him. They told me in town that you own the Cades spread up past Medicine Creek. That is correct. They said it runs 12,000 acres. Josiah chewed and swallowed before answering. 14, but a man does not eat 14,000 acres for supper. He eats bread and beef same as anyone. She turned her face toward the sun and let the warmth settle on her skin. You are the one they call the millionaire cattleman. I have been called that. I have also been called worse. A man is what he does, not what the newspaper prints about him. What do you do then? Today I am fixing a fence. Tomorrow I expect I will finish the step. After that we will see. He returned the next day, and the day after. By the end of the week, the fence stood straight, the steps were solid, and the gate swung true on new hinges. Clara could feel the difference in the way the latch clicked under her fingers. Everything aligned. Everything answered to the hand that touched it. On the 4th day she let him stay for supper. She cooked salt pork and biscuits and a pot of beans, moving through the small kitchen with a sureness that came from years of practice. Every jar, every spoon, every edge of the stove existed in exact position in her memory. She did not fumble. She did not reach wrong. Josiah watched her from the table. She could feel him watching, and she waited for the comment that always came, the one about how remarkable it was, how brave, how inspiring. People said those things when they meant how sad. He said nothing about her blindness. Instead, he said something else entirely. These biscuits are better than anything the cook at my ranch house has made in 3 years. She set the plate down hard enough that the fork rattled. Do not flatter me, Mr. Cade. Ma'am, I have 14,000 acres and 47 men on payroll, and I did not get either one by saying things I do not mean. She sat across from him. The lamplight she could not see threw their shadows together on the wall she could not see. And they ate in the kind of silence that is not empty, but full, the silence of 2 people who do not need to perform for each other. After supper he washed the dishes. She told him to leave them. He washed them anyway. Samuel never washed a dish in 15 years. Samuel sounds like he had other qualities. He did. But he never washed a dish. She heard the cloth draped over the edge of the basin and the water wrung out. I will be at the church on Sunday, Josiah said. She stiffened. I will not go back there. I am not asking you to. Not yet. I am asking you to trust that what happened last Sunday will not stand. Trust is a large word from a man I met 6 days ago. Yes, ma'am, it is. But I have fixed your fence and your steps and your gate, and every one of them is standing straight. A man who builds things straight can be trusted to stand straight himself. He left. Clara sat in the chair by the stove again. The chair that Samuel had made. The seat was worn smooth by years of her sitting in exactly this position, her hands folded, her thoughts turning inward. She ran her fingers along the arm of it and felt every groove, every nick, every place where the wood had softened from use. She thought about Josiah washing dishes in a kitchen that was not his. She thought about the way he had said left at the trench and nothing more. She thought about a man with 14,000 acres spending 4 days on a widow's fence. Sunday morning arrived bright and warm. Clara did not go to church. She sat on the new porch step and listened to the town wake up around her. The bell rang at 9. She heard wagons pass on the road, families heading toward the white clapboard building at the center of Redfield. She did not know what Josiah Cade had planned. She sat and waited. Inside the First Baptist Church, the congregation had filled the pews by 5 minutes past 9. Dorothea Pruitt sat in the front row beside her husband Edgar, whose land ran along the South Fork and whose opinion ran through every decision the town council made. The Reverend Howell stood at the pulpit and opened his Bible. The doors swung wide. Josiah Cade walked in carrying a plain wooden chair. It was well made. Oak, with a straight back and a seat that had been sanded smooth. He carried it down the center aisle, his boots loud on the floorboards, and the congregation turned to watch. He set the chair down in the center of the aisle, right where Clara had fallen on her knee 7 days earlier. Then he stood beside it and faced the room. The Reverend looked up from his Bible. "Mr. Cade, this is irregular." "Yes, Reverend, it is." So was what happened in this aisle last Sunday. The church went silent. Not the silence of singing that has stopped, but the deeper silence of people who know exactly what is being spoken about and wish it were not. Josiah looked at Dorothea Pruitt. She met his gaze and then looked away. "Last Sunday I watched a blind widow walk into this church alone. She had walked a mile to get here. She came because this was her church. She and her husband sat in these pews for 15 years. She buried him 11 months ago, and she came back because this was the only place left where she felt she still belonged." He paused. His voice was steady, the way a man speaks when he has thought carefully about each word. "And I watched 2 of you push her into the aisle. I watched her fall. I watched every person in this room pretend it did not happen. And then I watched her walk out alone." Edgar Pruitt shifted in his seat. Dorothea stared at her hands. The Reverend cleared his throat. "Mr. Cade, perhaps this is a matter for private conversation." "No, Reverend, it happened in public. It will be answered in public." Josiah put his hand on the back of the plain wooden chair. "This chair is for Clara Avery. It will sit in this aisle every Sunday until she is welcomed back into a pew by the same people who pushed her out of one. It will sit here empty, in the spot where she fell, so that every one of you has to walk past it and remember what you allowed." He looked around the room, face by face. "I have been in this territory 3 weeks. I do not know most of you. But I know this. A town that pushes a blind widow to her knees in the house of God has lost something that money cannot buy back. I have money. I have more of it than most of you will see in a lifetime. And I am telling you, it is worth nothing, not 1 cent of it, if this is what a Sunday morning looks like." The silence held. A child in the back pew whispered something and was hushed. Josiah turned to the Reverend. "I will be here every Sunday, Reverend, and that chair will be here every Sunday. And on the Sunday that Clara Avery is welcomed back by this congregation with the respect she deserves, I will replace that chair with a proper pew, built by my own hands, with a cushion and a place for her cane, and her name carved into the armrest so no one forgets again." He tipped his hat and walked back up the aisle. His boots were the loudest sound in the room. The door closed behind him. The Reverend Howell stood at the pulpit for a long time. Then he closed his Bible. "Let us pray," he said, and his voice broke on the second word. Word traveled the way it does in small towns. By noon, every household in Redfield knew what Josiah Cade had done. By evening, 3 women had come to the cabin. Clara heard them at the gate and opened the door. "Clara, it is Martha Dunlap and Helen Spears. And my daughter Annie." Clara stood in the doorway with her hand on the frame. Martha spoke carefully. "We are sorry. We should have said something last Sunday. We should have stopped it. Why did you not?" Martha was quiet for a moment. "Because Dorothea and Edgar own the general store accounts for half the families in town. Because we were afraid." Clara nodded slowly. "Fear is an honest answer. It is not a good one, but it is honest." Annie, who was 16, stepped forward. "I brought you a pie, Mrs. Avery. It is apple. My mother said you like apple." Clara reached out and took the pie. It was warm. She held it and felt the heat through the cloth, and something inside her chest shifted, the way a locked door moves when the right key finally turns. "Thank you, Annie. I do like apple." They stayed for 20 minutes. They did not stay long enough to be comfortable, but they stayed long enough to mean it, and Clara understood the difference. On Wednesday, Josiah came to the cabin. He did not bring lumber this time. He brought a small cloth bag and set it on the table. "Seeds," he said. "Marigolds and beans and 2 kinds of squash. Your garden plot behind the house has good soil, but it has gone to weeds. I have not planted since Samuel died. I know. But the soil does not know that, and it is ready." She picked up the bag and felt the small shapes inside it through the cloth. Seeds felt like promises, small, dry, and easy to ignore, but containing everything needed to become something real. "You did not have to do what you did on Sunday." "No, ma'am. They will talk about it for years. I expect they will. Some of them will hate you for it. Some of them should. A man who is never hated is a man who has never stood for anything." She set the seed bag down and turned toward him. She could not see his face, but she had learned his voice the way she had learned every surface in her house. She knew where the warmth was. She knew where the steadiness lived. "Why do you care what happens to me, Josiah?" He was quiet for a long time. She heard him pull out the chair and sit down across from her at the table, the chair that Samuel had made. "Because I had a wife. Her name was Eleanor. She died 4 years ago of the fever. And after she died, I had all the land and all the cattle and all the money. And I sat in a house with 14 rooms, and I could not find a single reason to walk into any of them." Clara folded her hands on the table. "I came out here because I heard the territory was growing. I told myself it was about land, about expanding the ranch. But the truth is, I was looking for a reason to care about something smaller than 14,000 acres, something the size of a fence post, or a cracked step, or a woman who walks a mile to church because she refuses to let her grief keep her inside." His voice did not waver, but it slowed the way a river slows when it reaches flat ground, spreading wide and becoming still. "You are not a project, Clara. You are not a cause. You are the first person in 4 years who made me want to fix something because it mattered, not because I could." She reached across the table. Her hand found his. It was large and rough and warm, and it closed around her fingers with a gentleness that had nothing to do with strength. The following Sunday, Clara Avery walked to church. She did not walk alone. Josiah Cade walked beside her, matching her pace, his hand resting lightly under her elbow, not guiding, but present. At the trench past the feed store he said right, because the path had shifted again, and she adjusted without breaking stride. They reached the steps. The congregation was already inside. Clara could hear the murmur of voices, not yet singing, the restless sound of people waiting for something they knew was coming. Josiah opened the door. The plain wooden chair still stood in the center of the aisle. Clara could not see it, but she felt the congregation rise. Not all at once. Martha Dunlap stood first, and then Helen Spears, and then Annie. And then a farmer named Orrin McCall who had not spoken to Clara in 6 months, and then the family behind him, and then the row behind them. Dorothea Pruitt remained seated. Edgar beside her did not move, but the rest of the church was standing. Martha stepped into the aisle and took the chair and moved it to the side. In its place she gestured to the third pew from the back, where Clara and Samuel had sat for 15 years. The pew was empty. A small cushion had been placed on the seat. "Clara," Martha said, and her voice was not loud, but it carried. "Welcome home." Clara stood in the doorway with the cane in her right hand and Josiah beside her left, and she heard the words land in the quiet church, and she felt them settle into the place in her chest that had been hollow for 11 months. She walked to the pew. She sat down. Josiah sat beside her. The cane rested against the armrest. She folded her hands. The Reverend Howell opened his Bible, and this time his voice did not break. After the service, Dorothea Pruitt walked past without speaking. Edgar followed her. Clara did not turn her head, but Josiah watched them go. He said nothing. Some reckonings come fast, and some come slow, and there was no rushing the kind that had to happen inside a person before it could show on the outside. Outside the church, 3 families stopped to speak to Clara. Orrin McCall shook her hand and told her that Samuel had once helped him mend a wheel axle in a rainstorm, and he had never properly thanked him. Annie brought another pie. This time it was peach. In the weeks that followed, Josiah came to the cabin most days. They planted the garden together. He described the rows, and she pressed the seeds into the soil with fingers that knew exactly how deep was deep enough. The beans went in first, then the squash, then the marigolds along the border where the morning sun would reach them earliest. He did not move in. He did not propose. He came in the morning and worked, and sat with her in the afternoon, and left before dark, and the space between them closed not in a single moment, but in the accumulation of small ones. A hand offered at a step. A cup of coffee poured without asking. A sentence begun by one and finished by the other, as if they had been talking for 30 years instead of 30 days. One evening in early June, the garden was beginning to show green. Clara knelt beside the first row of bean plants and felt the small leaves with her fingertips. They were real. They had come up from the dry seeds and the dark soil and the steady watering, and now they were reaching toward a sun she could not see, but could feel warm on the back of her neck. Josiah knelt beside her. "They are coming in strong," he said. "I know. I can feel them." She sat back on her heels and turned her face toward him. "Josiah, yes, Clara, that chair you brought to the church, the one you set in the aisle. What about it? You said you would replace it with a pew when I was welcomed back, with my name carved in the armrest. I did say that." She was quiet for a moment. The evening was still. Somewhere a meadowlark sang its falling note. I do not need my name on anything. I have lived without seeing my own face for 15 years. A name on wood means nothing to me. What does mean something to you? She put her hand on his arm. Her fingers found the muscle and the bone and the warmth of his skin through the cotton sleeve. This, a man who shows up, a man who builds what needs building, and says what needs saying, and does not leave when the work is done. He covered her hand with his. I am not leaving, Clara. I know you are not. That is why I am saying it. The chair that Samuel had built still sat by the stove inside the cabin, the one with the smooth arms and the seat worn to the shape of her sitting. But now when she sat in it in the evenings, she did not fold her hands. She rested them on the arms of the chair and listened for the sound of boots on the new step, the step that did not creak, the step that held firm because a man who built things straight had built it for her. And when the boots came, which they did most evenings now, she did not rise to meet them. She sat and let the door open and let the warmth come in, because she had learned something in the months since a stranger walked her home from a church that did not want her. She had learned that being valued is not a thing that happens to you. It is a thing you allow. And she had spent 11 months refusing to allow it, not because she did not want it, but because she had believed that the wanting itself was the last door she could not afford to open. Josiah had not opened it for her. He had simply stood on the other side of it and waited. And Clara, who had memorized every surface and every sound and every temperature in her small, dark, beautiful world, had finally reached for the handle herself.